Looks like we're good. All right, I'd like to call to order the Middletown City Council special meeting for Wednesday, August 24th, 2022. If we could start with a moment of meditation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, please. You. Okay. Ms. Ganku, oops, as soon as you're done passing out papers, would you please do the roll call?
Mr. Farrell.
Here.
Ms. Nenny. Here. Mr. Moon.
Here.
Mr. Muterspaw.
Here.
Mayor Condrey.
Here. I haven't signed any special meeting documents yet. Are we?
Get your spot.
This is the, the back. All right, we'll pass it around, so we won't file it until we've signed it. Is that?
You can just go ahead and move to receive and file the special documents, then you guys can sign them.
Okay. Do we have a motion to receive and file the special meeting documents?
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Gank, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Nenny.
Yes.
Mr. Moon.
Yes.
Mr. Muterspaw.
Yes.
Mayor Condrey.
Yes.
Mr. Farrell.
Yes.
Okay, that brings us to an update on the fire stations.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Condrey and members of council for agreeing to hold this special meeting on the two subjects of fire station construction funding update and our remaining ARPA funds. To begin with, I want to give you a little bit of an overview of the fire station construction funding. Let me get the, does she have the remote? I'm sorry.
Yes.
There we go. Firemen are only allowed to do 5 clicks. So. Not going to the next.
You gotta click it the other
Set.
way.
Try going the other way.
Other way. There you go. There you go.
Won't go past that. Is it? Go back, but it won't go. There we go. It's a lawyer thing.
It doesn't matter. Sure.
Okay. Council, I want to give you an update on where we're at with the fire station construction. We did put the fire station construction bids out for the design build, and after interviewing 4 companies, we went with App Architectural out of Inglewood, and our fire department has sat down with them and started to look at the cost. The voters approved the levy, which provides $16.8 million for the construction cost of the 4 fire stations. Unfortunately, when we started this project a year and a half ago, we were very confident that $16.8 million was going to get the stations built. Construction-wise, we knew from the beginning that that did not include the soft cost, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. But as you can see, inflation has raised the costs significantly. We have a construction estimated gap of about $3 million. So once again, this is the worst case scenario in the increased cost from the 16.8 million. It appears that the construction costs are going to come in around $19.8 million, and that is simply to physically build the stations. We also have what are called soft costs, which we knew were never part of the 16.8 million, and those are coming in significantly higher than we expected. Now, some of those soft costs, once again, that's a worst case scenario because there's things like, but that's included in there, like the permits and the construction fees we can waive. But other soft costs are, as I said, permit fees, soil boring, furniture to outfit the station, construction testing and special inspections, telephone, IT access control costs, radio equipment, station alerting equipment to alert the particular station that they have a run to respond to whatever fire EMS call they have. Things like the locker racks of gear storage and moving cost. That cost at worst case scenario today is about $2.6 million. And then we have the contingency cost. That's the cost built in that the design builders put in that in a worst case scenario, if inflation gets worse and or supplies, material is even more expensive, they have a built-in cost of $1.98 million. Those numbers up there, worst case scenario, amounts to about 24.4 million. The construction cost, the 19.8 million, is about an 18% increase in what we thought was going to happen a year and a half ago when we announced the levy at $16.8 million. And originally, how the levy was worded as a millage, the way tax collection was going at that time, we kind of looked like we were going to have actually collected in the area of $18 million. However, when it came down to actually the language for the levy, it had to be a true dollar amount. So we went with the $16.8 million. So what do? Well, there's a couple things we'll look at here. The possibility of using ARPA funds or general fund surplus. That'll be the decision. The question will arise, can you use ARPA funds for the building of fire stations? Well, I think that answer, and I'm going to leave it to Ben, maybe yes, maybe no. However, the maybe yes part of it is, I think at the end of the day, we'd have to do some revenue replacement to be able to use dollars. So, for example, we could pay public safety salaries out of the ARPA funds and then as a revenue replacement use those funds to cover the increased costs and the soft costs for the building of the fire stations. So that's what we're looking at, and maybe a discussion when we talk about the ARPA fund, and then to down the road look at possibly what general fund revenue surplus can be used. With that, let me see if Chief Snively has anything to add.
Not unless you have questions.
Paul, my first question is, how much value do we currently hold in the properties and assets of the current fire stations? And what potential plans could we have for those buildings and properties in order to offset some of this? What is their value?
From the beginning, the intentions were to sell those properties. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we have any value.
About $2 million.
$2 million? Yep. Okay.
We have done some talk about the use of those 4 stations. For example, we've had a little bit of discussion because of lack of space for the health department about the possibility of moving the health department over to Station 81, which is across the street from the fires, or from the post office, or from here. But nothing's set in stone. That's just the initial discussion. But as Chief Snively said, I guess the value of, if we sold those 4 stations, is approximately $2 million.
Paul, one of the reasons that the reason that the last council paid off the LED streetlights was to pay down the debt for a station. Has that been factored into the savings?
Not at this point.
Okay. I would encourage us to look at that first.
And that's, I guess, really is what essentially I was referring to in surplus money from other areas.
When we calculated the 16.8 million, was that based on today's current numbers, and have we projected into the future?
Not today. It was based on late 2020 cost.
The incoming 16.8 million. So we're anticipating 16.8 million coming from
That levy is a true dollar levy, so I don't think, the way it was explained to me, is we can't collect more than 16.8.
Yeah, that's the difference between a public, like a fire levy that certifies a millage rate versus a capital bond issuance certifies you are going to get this exact amount no matter what. So that's what the capital bond issuance allows you to do. The problem, and I'm certainly no bond lawyer, our team worked on that. They issue spotted that, and the previous city manager, quite frankly, proposed doing a fire levy. When you do that, you don't get the entirety of those funds up front, nor can you borrow against all of it. That's why people, when they'll do construction, they do a capital bond issuance. You spec out how much is it actually going to cost to build it, and then that bond issuance gives you the exact amount that you tell us to get you. Versus a levy, your funds can flow differently depending on tax valuation in any given year.
Okay, so if, for example, our property values go up, or we can spread it out thinner amongst all property owners in order to get the 16.8 million, is that how that would work?
Effectively, if, doing a capital bond issuance guarantees you are going to get the exact amount specified. Right. If you have more people that show up with more properties and more value, everyone's actual expense for that given year will be less.
Got it, okay.
But that's the difference. It says, no matter what, we're going to give you this amount, $16 million. However we get there, the underlying math doesn't matter from a finance perspective. It gives you that exact amount, no more, no less.
And when we determined that issuance for the bond levy, what kind of contingency did we calculate for at that time, and how far over that contingency were we? I mean, did we not account for inflation of construction costs the first time around?
At that time, we did not. That was the number that the administration at that time felt they were confident in we would be able to successfully build the 4 fire stations at. Within the fire department, we thought, well, talking with other departments, what they have built here recently, that and what our plans were for the build and the square footage and that it'd be tight, and using the economy of scale of why we were going with 4 stations at once was that it'd be tight, but in that present day's economy, we could do it. But we did make it clear that if we had a bad bout of inflation, that was going to be tough.
Yeah. And then I'm not sure if I ever received an email or information from you guys about, and you can send this later if that's appropriate, but how many bids we received for these stations and what those bid amounts were for the different quotes that we got back. I just haven't.
Tom, you want to come down and address that?
Yeah, so we received 8 design bids.
Can you speak in the microphone, because I think people are going to miss probably what you're saying. Thank you.
So we received 8 bids for the design and architectural work. They actually put together a build product, what we're going to, square footage, what it's going to look like, and then they send out bids for the total construction cost. So the actual cost of what the bids are going to come in are estimated by the design firm. We don't have those solid numbers yet.
Okay.
This is their best on what they're building now. Brookville, Ohio, Springfield, Ohio, Beaver Creek Township, some of those stations that we toured that are kind of, the necessities are there. They're not Taj Mahal type fire stations. They're what we need. Those are the numbers they're looking at as far as the square footage. So that's how they arrive at that number. Once a construction manager comes on, then there will be actual bids sent out. And then we'll have the actual maximum price. But again, with the contingency, the construction costs that they've given us, they're pretty confident that that's where it's gonna fall. So that'll answer your question.
Just to
Kinda?
Yeah. I guess just since we have this pot of money, you know, I know you said that they're not extravagant in any way, and we saw some designs for potential conceptual station designs and that sort of thing. I wonder, you know, just as being good stewards of this taxpayer money, how close we could actually get to the number that we levied without going over.
We could get there, but you're going to have a lot cheaper station, and the idea is to get these stations to last 40 to 50 years, not 20 to 25 years. So if we did these and just hit that $16 million, you're going to have 4 stations that last 20 to 25 years. They're essentially going to be kind of like headquarters station now, maybe just a little better than that. But once again, we'd be back in the problem of they last 20 to 25 years maybe and not hold up. As far as size of them, we have looked at that over the last couple weeks about reducing the size of a couple of them a little bit to cut down some money. But then once again, when you do things like that, you then have to reduce your plans of what you were putting in those stations and storing in those stations and your ability to train meetings and things of that nature.
Yeah, just to add to what Chief Lally said, essentially, we're trying to design 50-year stations. I mean, that's kind of where you want to be. And a lot of the money is tied up as far as what you see in differences between stations is the exterior envelope of the station. When you start putting masonry on the outside of a building, it gets a lot more expensive. However, that's where you get your longevity as well for the life of the building. So you don't want to go, for lack of a better word, too cheap. We'll be back here doing this again a lot sooner than what really makes sense to me. Again, a lot of it's tied up in the masonry, the square footage. I think we have been very conservative with our approach. Even in the conceptual drawings, there is some masonry on the building. It's totally masonry, and this won't build a total masonry building. Very expensive, very expensive. However, I think it's got, from what we're looking at as square footage, it's going to meet the, you know, the requirements we're going to have and hopefully build out some, especially the station on the Premier property out across from Paychecks. That area is going to grow a lot. The station that covers that now at Town Boulevard and Dixie has 3 people in the station. Eventually that station's probably going to have 5, so we need to plan for those things. Same thing with headquarters. We need to plan for some growth. So if we take the exact square footage that we have now, I mean, on its face, it doesn't make sense. Also, things you have to keep in mind, we're going to have to add a tornado shelter required by the Ohio Revised Code now. That's square footage that we didn't count on. However, we'll probably do creative things like we'll use a bathroom so we can get dual use out of that room. Gear turnout, where we store turnout gear, it has to be a separate room. There's a lot of codes and things that are out there now that are required of fire stations that weren't there when we built the stations that we have now. So there is some square footage tied up there. But again, the hard cost of this, we'll know more when the construction manager is brought on and the bids are actually sent out But based on the architect and design firm's experience, these are the numbers that they're pretty comfortable with. Contingency, again, we'll talk briefly about that. You got to have that built in. Two of the sites are former school sites. Don't know how those were closed. We want to believe that they were closed right. When we start doing boring to make sure they're going to support the structure, we don't know what we're going to run into. We want to have a plan for that. We don't want to be coming back and saying, hey, we found all these surprises and now we need $2 more million. Not comfortable with that. So we want to try to have the worst case scenario in front of you. See what we're up against. There are obviously things that we can consider as far as reducing square footage, be more creative on the exterior envelope of the building, which I think about it every day, to be honest with you. So we are still working on that, but I thought it was important to bring this in front of you and make sure that the worst case scenario you're aware of.
Chief, I appreciate the explanation. I think it's important for the citizens and, like I said, the taxpayers to understand what this increase really represents and what it, and the growth potential that it represents for the fire station. So, I'm sure that you guys have made your best effort to try to make this as cost-effective as possible. I just think that that's important for the citizens to understand as well.
And there's one other part that we really haven't addressed is response times. We live and die by that. Getting people out of the station and onto the vehicles is critical. Seconds matter. So the stations that we have now are very cramped. The Station 82, that I mentioned at Town and Dixie, our response times out of that building are slower than the others, just simply because it takes longer to get dressed. Because, they're getting around, trying to move around each other. Those things all matter. So when you design a station, one of our goals is to reduce response times, and we believe that'll happen. So there's more than just to this than new buildings. It has a lot to do with our operation and how we function, not to mention the health of our firefighters. So that's also very critical, and those types of things are built into the new station that we don't have now. So that's another big part of why this is important.
Just not so much for Chief Snively, but just a thought on the staff report. I think we might be missing one item we've already approved, so staff might want to look in that. Last summer, fall, we approved some mobile bathroom trailers that we could use at parks and for events that I think was ARPA funds. So we might want to look into that.
Was that ARPA or CARES?
I thought that was CARES.
Okay, maybe it was CARES.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think.
all right.
Have we
Paul,
We'll check into it.
I'm going to jump a little bit to ARPA discussion of options. Last fall, they're not here to defend themselves, but last fall I met with a former administration that sits where you guys were sitting, and they were adamant, because when the levy came out, I said, well, why can't we use ARPA funds for the fire stations and not put a levy on, which is tax dollars to people? And I sat down for probably a half an hour. I don't know if you were in that meeting, Zach, but they said they were adamant. They did legal work on it that we could not use ARPA funds for fire stations. I understand with revenue replacement, maybe you guys found something on that. I just want to make sure that we don't pay for sins 10 years down the road for the convenience of today, as far as using something if we're trying to move money around. And I guess that's my whole thing. We need these fire stations. Everybody knows we need them badly. And Chief Snively's right. Seconds matter on everything with response time. But I just want to make sure, because I just know from meeting with the former administration, they were adamant that you could not use those dollars. That's why they felt comfortable with the tax levy.
I was going to comment about just overall use of ARPA funds. In my opinion, I'm looking to legal on that 100%. I think our job is to determine how to use funds, but your job is to determine if they can be used in that way. And I would ask that you not put that burden on council to determine if these funds can be used for ARPA. We've got kind of our lane, which is to determine what we feel things should be used on, but I would really appreciate legal taking the reins.
Yeah, and I think we brought in some expert legal opinion on that. They've done a very good job, because I will tell you this in regards to the paperboard site. The county, before they would issue us funds on that and give the go-ahead, our legal counsel on that really researched it, went into it, and it passed the test of the county and the county's prosecutor office. So with that said, Ben, I'll let you.
Yeah, I'm happy to discuss it now, later, whatever. All the buckets, all the different items. If you want to proceed now, we can. I can introduce Jeff Harris. He's the real guy that actually knows all
I've
of the
got it
ARPA
in-
stuff in detail.
Yeah, we don't have to do it at the moment, and really, more than anything, I don't really care the why. I just want to know yes or no in the end, personally. I care
Okay.
why, but you know what I'm saying? Like, in the
It's
end,
our job to make it bulletproof for you. We get that and we'll do
We
that.
could talk all day long about the reasoning, and probably some citizens would want to understand the full reasoning.
Yep.
But for, clarity of our conversation,
Okay. We'll assure that.
Well, and I know
occurs.
Hamilton's, if I'm not mistaken, building a fire station with their ARPA funds, so I know other cities around it are,
Again, happy to cover it now, later, whichever it is, but yeah.
talk about it later.
so when it comes to fire stations, I don't want to say the dispopular thing, but I'm going to say an alternative. Have we thought about one fewer, doing 3 with the money, and then
Well, the problem with that is we told the citizens who voted on this that we were building 4 fire stations. So I'm not sure where we come out on that on the legal end of things.
That's not a legal issue. The bond certifies up to the 16.8 million to build fire stations. It doesn't say in the ballot language, we will build 4 stations. It's to build them, but it doesn't say how many. Legally speaking, not politically, community involvement or whatever, but legally speaking,
I guess that's
you're okay.
politically, it would cause a problem. It certainly would crush morale within the fire department. I mean, we've worked a lot with our firefighters and paramedics and EMTs, and basically got to the point where they've done a lot of work, a lot of sacrifices on this, and to go back and say, okay, we're only going to build 2, or only going to build 3.
I guess my feedback would be, specifically on the fire stations, I don't want to just default to ARPA because it's easy. I want to have options as opposed to just, here's one option. What about issuing debt without expending ARPA? What about going into the general fund? What about, what are the other options other than just doing ARPA? Because I agree, we've acquired a fire station in my lifetime. I don't believe we have built a fire station in my lifetime. We need the new fire stations. The city has grown exponentially over the last 40-plus years. They're not strategically positioned.
No.
So I'm on board with getting it done. I want to make sure that council knows of all the options instead of.
And that's what we're working on, and that's part of what we're talking up here, discussion of ARPAs. I mean, we're kind of limited as far as if we're going to pay for the 4 stations and using ARPA or revenue replacement funds, general fund surplus money, and then outside of that, issuing debt, bonds, and that whatnot to cover is there. And then you got the other suggestions. Okay, do we only build 2 now, 3 now?
Well, in my take, I agree with Tal, and that first off, Chief Snively, what you said, we want to build these for 50 years. I feel like Middletown's had some history of just passing the buck down the road, and I want to get the city set up right now. We're financially secure enough to where we can last the next 50 years and be in good state. I know Sam and I talked yesterday. We have almost $18 million in our encumbered general fund reserve. And personally to me, we'll talk about ARPA funds and all that, but that's what that money's there for. We try to keep 20% in that. We have almost 50% in that. So we have over $10 million, which we can put in a capital improvement funds right now. And I feel like the ARPA funds should be used for economic development and putting money back to where our citizens can use them. And I feel like that's the perfect fund for that money to come out of. That's me personally, but that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of going on the cheap on the building materials. We need them to last if we're going to do it.
Right.
Do it right.
So if you're looking for direction from all of us, I guess I would agree. The building expense and the increase, I can totally understand. I don't love that it's coming from ARPA. I do think that there are more useful ways to spend ARPA money, especially when we do have capital reserves available and other financing opportunities to cover that gap. So that's my feedback.
We'll continue to look at all options. Next on the agenda is the main purpose of the meeting, and it's ARPA funds. As you're aware of, we received ARPA funds that totaled $18.9 million. And the purpose for today is to discuss council's directions on the use of the remaining ARPA funds, which is about $14.6 million unencumbered balance. To date, we've spent approximately $3.83 million. Those things we've spent it on include the LED lights, premium pay for employees, community center and expansion project, the police locker room renovations. We do have a little bit more to pay in premium pay with the dispatchers, corrections officers, and records. They're currently in negotiation, in collective bargaining negotiations at this time, but that's not going to be a big cost. Resolution R 2021-42 on November 16th of 2021, council approved the funds that were received from the American Rescue Plan Act of 21, and basically past administration called it a budget, were basically set up, allocated how they would be spent, which included LED street lights retrofit, large cleanup, targeted transformation downtown riverfront redevelopment of $7.5 million, town mall, $3.7 million, the Manchester Snyder housing, $1.5 million, community center youth, the community center, $2.1 million, set aside money for the Bell site, quality housing of $1 million, AK headquarters demo and remediation, $125,000, CERTA, $125,000, housing in Oakland and new construction demolition, money for parks, economic development grants, MVB support, premium pay for employees, workforce training, neighborhood. So a lot of that, a major portion of that has not yet come to fruition. So the main purpose for staff today was to come back to council and say, we need to look at this. Do we want to continue down the path of some of these requests or some of these appropriations, or do we want to re-look and adjust where we're going to spend some of this money? Obviously, a large portion of that, there's a couple things. The $7.5 million for the transformational downtown riverfront redevelopment is essentially no longer part of the plan. And then when we get into like the AK headquarters, the old AK headquarters, the CERTA site, we are on the verge of applying for EPA grants that will allow us to use EPA money to do phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 demolition and redevelopment of those lands. So once again, do we continue to go down that road? That's a decision that we're putting towards council today. I will say that as staff, we sat down and had some areas that we put up here for proposal that we believe are important areas that council should consider. But once again, this is a situation where we're going to look for direction from council on how to use the ARPA fund. And these, once again, we're looking at City Hall, the city building improvements, Wi-Fi, Town Mall, Fire Station gap funding of $3 million just for the construction, water capital projects, Butler Tech. Next slide. As far as the city building here is concerned, it's in major need of repair. We have a lot of problems. Just this room will show you that we have a mold issue in this room. We're having to take down all these the boards and finding mold behind them. There's a lot of moisture in here. At the council meeting a couple weeks ago, if the humidity level gets too high in here, it shuts all the computer systems down. We've had to do some work on the computer system because the issue in here is causing damage to the computer system. So how do we fix that? We know we need a replacement of the total HVAC system, a total replacement of all the windows in the city building, and other repairs such as the columns that quite possibly will total nearly $4 million. Next slide. Installation of fiber and Wi-Fi at Smith and Lefferson Park, which would total about $250,000. The Town Mall redevelopment, targeted use of $3.75 million. That entire amount may not be necessary and could be reprogrammed for other uses once the project's redevelopment costs are more refined, which we've done a lot of work on the last couple days, so we're going to be seeing more on that in the next few weeks. And once again, that may be a situation where ARPA funds might not be able to be targeted to, that we would have to do some revenue replacement. And then the fire station gap just on the construction, $3 million. I think there's one more slide. And water, two more slides actually. Water capital projects, $2.6 million. Water capital fund is projected to have a carryover fund balance below $500,000 with the limited investment in system replacement the city has currently programmed. The use of ARPA funds to supplement the water capital fund will allow it to maintain a reserve balance to at least 2030 that hedges against any unforeseen emergency repairs or system failures. Next slide. Water capital projects. The ARPA fund, continuing on the water capital projects, the ARPA fund proposed would be used to replace the water main system on Lisa Lane and Dix Road. These areas currently experience high frequent water main breaks due to the high pressure of the distribution system, and any remaining capital fund dollars could then be programmed to address issues elsewhere in the city. And I think that's the last slide. A lot of information thrown at you, a lot of decisions to be made. Staff is looking for direction from the resolution of 2021-42. What do we continue with versus what we have identified today as things that we need to address? So with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
The big thing that's missing for me is I'd like to see Manchester somewhere in here.
There was one thing else missing on there. Can you go back to the slide on our proposals? I'm sorry, you.
Go ahead.
Butler Tech Aviation School, that's what the question marks are up there. We received, as you're aware, $7 million from the county. Butler Tech and the city has received for the Butler Tech Aviation School. The total cost of that project is going to be between 11 and $12 million. Butler Tech has stated that they are going to add some money towards that, and we're hoping the city would also. And I apologize. As soon as you said that, I thought, uh-oh.
I was just saying, I really like to see the Manchester building have some money set aside. I think that's been a priority for a long time. We know there's going to have to be some public investment to save that building. So that's the major thing that's missing for me. I did have a question on City Hall facility improvements. I know going back to the staff retreat in the winter, we were talking about applying for a grant for some of this. I can't remember if it was the HVAC or the generator. Hi, Via.
It was the generator.
Is that any part of this $4 million? And where are we at with that grant? Or
I don't
is that
believe so.
not
Scott,
even-
do you want to address that? It was the generator, and I do not believe, but I'll let Scott.
So we got confirmation we are going to be awarded the grant for the generator. I think that was 400,000-ish, and I think our city share of the whole project will be around 50. So that's not.
So that's not part of the
Yes,
4 million?
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Right.
Thanks.
We approved HVAC within the last few years. Was that only for part of the building? Does anybody know?
Well, we used some CARES Act funding for some improvements to the HVAC system that were related to like ventilation. I remember that.
I know it was with Air Force One, only because
I think a lot of it's just been Band-Aid work, quite frankly.
Okay.
That things that had to be replaced or we weren't going to have heating and air conditioning. So I think this is more of a comprehensive fix for the entire system. So.
Okay.
with the city building, I'm back to the,
And, go ahead, Mayor.
well, I was just gonna, the same issue I have with the fire stations and the use of funds for these capital improvements. I feel like that's what we should be budgeting for this stuff long-term, and we haven't been, and that's why we had our 20% reserve, and I just, I feel like we're using ARPA because we
Have it.
didn't quite plan in the past, and I don't like that part.
Which is no fault of anybody
No,
that's helping
no.
run this city right now, but it's where we're at.
Well, the city hit some pretty hard times between 2008 and 2014, and a lot of stuff was kicked down the road out of
Right.
necessity.
What, and this is probably Scott, probably a you question here. On the city hall improvements, is there something that's more critical than the others, or does it all work in concert? Would you do windows before HVAC, HVAC before windows? Is there a way to phase it in to do it over time, or?
We tend to fill the windows.
It all needs done. I'd probably want to talk with the building maintenance supervisor to confirm if there was some preference on what happens first, but I mean, it all needs.
It all works hand in hand.
You're right, so.
Windows are almost, talking to Neil, it's going to be costly but easier. For example, so we'll be starting soon on replacing the windows on the 4th floor in the school section, but we're actually using some of the rent money from the schools up front to start with replacing the windows on the 4th floor because they're in the worst shape.
So, Paul, what's our plan we have over $10 million over our 20% general fund policy reserve. Do we have a plan for that? Because I feel like that does need to be factored in on this, because that can take care of things such as fire stations, city hall improvements.
Once again, yeah, we don't have a detailed plan for that at this time. We do know that the plan is, and as I stated, as far as those are some of the funds that could be available for the gap in the construction issue. We're having issues in terms of staffing and fire and police, which are causing a tremendous amount of overtime. For example, in the fire department, we're going to be at least $250,000 over budget in overtime because we've lost so much staff. They're constantly having to force overtime out on the streets and the police part of it. So, there's a significant cost there. But as far as a detailed plan, we have not finalized it.
I mean,
Nathan is actually working on that.
Okay. I mean, I look at this and I don't see money going back to the citizens. I don't see economic expansion outside of the town mall, which is, theoretically a couple years out. So what can we, I guess.
Our proposals there to you are just bringing to you guys some critical needs that we know exist out there. And so where do we balance those critical needs versus some of the issues there we have we identified back in November of 2021. And it's a matter of, I get that on some of those things, but a lot of our proposal allows us to continue to do city work, to do what we need to do to operate the city on a day-to-day basis.
And I think, and I somewhat agree with you, but I want to jump back just a minute. At our council retreat, I do recall we talked about using some of those reserve funds for investments in our parks, which we haven't done for a very long time. So I don't want to lose sight of some of that conversation as well. But
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
you know, I think you're right. I think some of the rub is like, how do we meet the needs that we have now while also building revenue for the future? And I think that's what you're saying about the economic development is, you know, hopefully that creates more revenue, more jobs, more income tax, and that some of these
Right.
things end up getting taken care of it. So I think that's, you know, I wish we'd been able to see this before we started the meeting so we could kind of get our heads around like what you were going to propose and ask and think through, because I don't disagree with Mr. Farrell about the economic development. But one question on item 2 on the broadband Wi-Fi. I would assume this is the city downtown Wi-Fi. The city would own and operate and maintain and control the advertising and the spending and all of that
Yes.
stuff? Okay.
And on the broadband, I know there's a lot of state and, well, federal infrastructure, I think, but state infrastructure and broadband grants out there, and I'm not sure, have we looked into any of that for use on the parks?
I don't think Troy's down here, is he? I'm gonna have to get you an answer from Troy on
I just
that.
keep seeing things left and right about it, and until now I haven't really put 2 and 2 together that might be a great use for applying for other funds, if they're out there.
Yeah, I mean, the ARPA guidelines definitely indicate that broadband and things
Yeah,
like
we
that, the
could.
infrastructure is important to the use of those funds, so I understand why it's there, but if there are grant opportunities in any of these columns, I mean, certainly the more that we have, the more that we can do. But to Councilman Moon's point about the items that we're missing and Mr. Farrell as well. Just looking back at the original grid that we were given by the previous administration, some of the things that they wanted to spend money on, I was surprised not to see some of those kind of things here. I mean, obviously the Manchester and the parks and those sort of things, but I think that, there was a lot more community involved, sort of line items, and
Once again, those things are still there.
there were smaller
These-
amounts. These are
yeah.
obviously like the big ticket items, but I
Correct.
don't want to lose
Our
sight
purpose of that was to
smaller
say, hey, we want to make you aware of, these are some critical issues facing the city today. If the direction is to continue with the resolution from 2021, we can certainly do that, or have some type of a blended,
Yeah.
Right.
I'm just trying to figure out.
Move
so,
forward.
Like the city building, $4 million for the city building, while I look around and I can definitely see where the building needs the TLC that this would bring. I wonder to what price tag on some of the other items that we had previously discussed.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe we should be having the ARPA conversation after we have the general fund conversation that Nathan's working on. That
and
maybe,
that, yeah, and we actually are not saying we need to make a decision today
Right.
on how we're going to spend these ARPA funds. We're saying, we want to make you aware of what situations there are, so we can actually start to put the plan together, or we want to get direction, or from November 16th of 2021, are these, obviously, the transformational downtown riverfront development, the 7.5 million, that's opened up, that's free.
Well,
And-
I feel as if though we have a city building, obviously it needs work, but we have a town that's been ignored for 10 plus years. Like, let's rebuild the town with the funds that we have and then figure it out from there.
Sure.
Well, the curb appeal is important.
Yeah.
And I think that when we talk about the ARPA money, that there definitely should be an intent for curb appeal in Middletown when we're talking about the use of those dollars.
Well, I've done a lot of studying on this, and what a lot of cities have done around us locally and nationally is they give money to, for example, grants to fix people's siding and roofs. Obviously, we have, we can go out and tag a house that needs new siding and has chipping paint or siding that's falling off, but if a homeowner doesn't have the ability to fix that, then what do? There's nothing we can do. So how can we, this is the people's money, so how can we work with the people? How can we work to rebuild the city? And don't get me wrong, all these are needs definitely, but how can we put $4 million into a city building when we're not helping the residents at all with this, in my opinion?
Well, we are, because we can provide services that they need, and without that, we're spending money
I understand.
obviously on higher energy costs and whatnot. I want to just state, when you look at the American Rescue Plan Act website, it has like a tagline, right? So the tagline is to provide direct relief to Americans, contain COVID-19, and rescue the economy. So
That's my point, yeah.
when you look at that, it just kind of brings it very succinctly into, I think, our purview as to where we can try to keep our mental state. I think Paul's brought up a lot of big financial needs that the city has, so I appreciate all those numbers up there, because I think through that we can figure out where do we find the money to execute all of that mission, while also executing the mission of increasing the economy and diversifying it in Middletown, so that we do have the money moving forward, that we don't end up in a situation where we're $4 million behind on city hall improvements.
And so, essentially what I'm hearing is we need to look, like Councilman Farrell was suggesting, the reserves we have. I think it's something that those are that
And we
is
don't
an
need
area where we're going to have to put that money to. And I'd have to ask Ben, and technically, the city building, any of the improvements would probably have to be part of that revenue readjustment, correct?
Jeff could speak better to that, but yeah, I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. I'm confident we can find a way to do those improvements, but yes, lost revenue is one of the different ways you can get to that point.
Paul, I have really just two things that and your list is a good list. I know some of this stuff is badly needed. I get that. The two things, and one's a smaller item, and I don't know legally what we can do, Ben, but so many of our events here in the city are community-driven, not city-driven. If I leave something off, forgive me, but I'm thinking of the Hops in the Hangar, the Balloon Challenge, the Sunset Concert in the Park, just things like that. And I wish there was something we can do to make those events even better. And I know you guys have put so much work into those with the people that run them, but those do bring people into the city. I mean, they bring people into the city, they increase morale in the city, people want to be here, and it kind of falls in line with our whole purpose of the town mall redevelopment, is to bring people here and have people stay here instead of leaving and go somewhere else to eat and hang out. So if there's something that we can do, I don't know, like a grant process or something, it's minimal money compared to this stuff. But those events are so important for our city, not just so much for the people that run them, but for people to get people here and get them to come to Middletown and visit and spend their dollars here. And I think that's important to something that we really need to consider. We were eating at the Swire a few weeks ago, and we were talking to somebody out there outside the Sorg, and they have to replace all their windows at Sorg Opera House. I don't know if anybody here has been to concerts at the Sorg, but they pack out. It's a really cool place. It's a venue that people from outside the city come to, and they need help financially with stuff like that. So that does pump dollars into our city when we do things like that. The second thing I had was, I'm not giving up on the aquatic center. I know some people are like, well, do we need it? No, but it'd be an awesome thing to have for our community. The places that have a good aquatic center in their city, that's their hub for the whole summer. And I think that's just important. I don't think we need a pool. I think we need an aquatic park like the ones we've been researching, and I'm going to keep pushing that. And I know others on council want it also. I think it's great for our city, and it's something that we could really just be proud of. And it goes along with all the development we're doing, but I just think that's something that I don't want to give up on. Even if and the naysayers have said to me, well, we don't make money off of it. The city's job is not to make money. We're not a private industry. Our job is to provide the best services and keep people in our city here. And I think with an aquatic center, that would really go a long way. I really think it's something we should, whether it's out of other fund money or ARPA, it's something we should really consider.
Okay. To answer your first question, and I wasn't going to really talk about this until next council meeting, but on Monday, we have an intern who will be starting to do the very things you talked about. We're all here familiar with Jerry Lewis, and she'll be starting Monday, working 27 hours a week out of the Economic Development Department, but doing nothing but special projects, events. So we get people in this community, we encourage them to participate and have things that are city-sponsored, such as the popular things, such as Hops in the Hanger, and assist them with what we can with that, the parades, and other things that's going to increase the community's pride in Middletown. And so we are going to be addressing some of that, and then we're working to put that position into the 2023 budget as a full-time position.
If I could just chime in on your thoughts on the community-led stuff, Rodney. I think that's kind of where my head is as far as like the parks investment, because almost everything you just named, go into the soccer and into the Midway, like that's an investment in those events. If Sunset's better, the music in the parks is better. You know, if Smith Park is better, the Balloon Challenge and Hops in the Hanger is better. If Lefferson is fixed up, Midway is going to do that much better. So I think that all ties together and is
Yeah, I
a
hope
way to
so.
look at it.
Like I was at a concert in Springboro last month at North Park, and they have an amphitheater there that's just incredible.
Right.
I mean, it looks cool. It was packed out, and it was a really cool concert. And I thought, man, that would be so cool to have something like that here at Middletown at Sunset or Smith or somewhere, the amphitheater. Just things like that is what I mean. And
I think to speak to both of those, I think that the biggest difference in some of those is one-time costs versus recurring costs, right? So fixing up the parks is a one-time cost that is appropriate for things like, non-recurring ARPA funding, but adding those items to our general fund, or to our line items in the budget and taking those out of the general fund, like adding Jerry, I think that's a great idea, because some of those community-run events really should be things that we're not just thinking about
Absolutely.
right now in terms of the ARPA money, but long-term
Right.
in terms of how do we sponsor them outside of just,
Yeah.
all of the services that we already provide in kind as a city to those community-run events. So I think that really speaks to the one-time costs
Yeah.
of the infrastructure of the parks and those sort
yeah,
of
I agree with both of you. Yeah.
yeah.
So-
I also want to add in there the arts and the murals and things like that. Things that, like I said, curb appeal, that makes the city more inviting to people. I would love to see every concrete wall in this city that isn't being utilized covered with some mural that pays homage to Middletown and what we do here. Big art installation pieces. I think on one of the proposals we got for the Manchester, one of the photos was from Louisville, and it had a big slugger bat, a giant building-sized slugger bat, like those kind of things. I think, I don't know, I imagine and envision our city with those kind of attractions and things that we don't really have right now. So I don't know, how do we incorporate those things into one-time costs that can make the city more attractive?
Let me ask you this. So going down this list, if we look at some of the things, do we want to continue down this path? So for example, the town mall, I think that's one thing we have to continue down. The Manchester Snyder housing,
Yes.
that's at 1.5. I guess we should
I would think we
continue.
need to double that, honestly.
I would expand on that to make it a preservation of historic buildings throughout Middletown. And I would increase that budget because that will ultimately capitalize all of downtown, which is getting people living downtown, high quality housing will turn around all those small businesses.
Okay.
Yeah,
What we
I
failed
feel
on for
like
years.
We also talked at one time about replacing the roofs of the First National Building and the Manchester to help preserve some of those old buildings. I mean, that was just one other conversation we had
And
about
I think
ARPA
that'll,
funds.
yeah, and I think that goes with like the RFQs that these companies have submitted on those. I'm sure they'll
Right.
have an ask from the city.
Although I don't think we got anything on that building, did we?
First National, I don't think.
It was a
We
part
did.
of, it was a part of one of the proposals.
One of them had.
Okay, well, yeah, okay,
One of them had a 4-part proposal.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I would say Manchester Snyder is that pivotal piece that's going to get everything else going. And so I would even go so far as to say we had originally, $1 million going towards the Vale site. And I think the Vale site is going to eventually come online. And I don't
Okay.
think we need to specifically divert funds there if we're trying to really focus on a little bit more directly. So
So if I went down that list, Vale Site is next. Vale Site, quality housing, $1 million. Do we continue to focus on that, are you saying, or?
I would get rid of that personally.
I think
rid of it?
someone's going to bid on that and do something great with it.
I think we need to start from the inside and work our way out.
Yes, yeah.
That's how I feel.
AK headquarters, demo, CERTA.
I think starting with where you're
Once
talking is
again.
good, and then I wouldn't specifically target ARPA funds yet on that.
Okay.
I mean, there was a.
And then the same thing through the Oakland.
category.
Oakland, I think, needs a kickstart, and I don't think it's going to be very expensive, and I think it could have an impact. So
And all of those kind of work together because
They
it's all
do,
that
yeah.
same neighborhood. And I, we made a commitment a number of years ago to that neighborhood to work on redevelopment's the wrong word, but revitalizing that neighborhood. I really don't want to lose focus on that.
I agree.
That Vale site is a huge anchor, and it may need money, may not need money. I think it's too soon to know, but I don't want anybody to misunderstand that is for me still a major focus, and I don't want staff to lose sight of it.
Even if the money gets reallocated to something else at this time from.
I look at Oakland separate from the Vale site, but maybe obviously they're next to each other, but I think that putting money towards Oakland means we're putting money into the existing neighborhood that's right there. I think Vale is its own, while tied, has its own potential in a different way.
I would agree with you.
I think when we talk about the neighborhood, we should also talk about the neighborhood cleanup, because I know that was one of the original line items that I feel like we never really, I mean, we talked about hiring, at one time we talked about hiring a company to come in and contract for code enforcement that would go out through all the neighborhoods and really clean up the city. And I think that that's something that sort of fell off when we had a change in administration as well. So I want to remember that.
I'll get
citywide
with Development
cleanup and all of
Services
that as
and
well.
we'll look back into that.
Okay.
So we have parks, 200,000. Is
I
that
think
something I
needs to-
heard?
I think that's a general fund line item, and I think that's way low on what we need to spend.
Well, and it was in the capital reserve is where almost all, I mean, I think there was multiple $1 million. I don't recall
Right.
the exact amount, so
I mean, I have, Paul.
I don't know which hand it comes out of, but
I'd like to see uniform signage across the city on the parks as a start. I feel like it would at least, even if we do nothing else, it's going to actually create a semblance of cohesiveness in our city and pride. And then, that's like the first step for me. And I think that was brought up in our strategic planning session with the
Some of
signage.
the signage and the, yeah. I mean, our Parks Master Plan is so great. I mean, it lays everything out, all of the costs,
Right.
itemizes everything down to the playground equipment and the trash receptacles and everything. And I just feel like if we don't do something with that Parks Master Plan soon, we're wasting all the money we spent on it. So
Yeah,
whether
I-
it comes out
I
of
agree.
general fund or ARPA, I think that that's an important line item for quality of life in the city.
Parks are a priority for me. I mean, if you have nice parks, you have a nice city, and
Right.
we have to put money into our parks. And I know Scott did a good presentation at the retreat
Right.
and went over that, but I think it's a priority. Better playground equipment, safer place, signage, everything.
Okay, what about the workplace training neighborhood housing repair program? We were putting 100,000 into that.
Is that where we are essentially kind of like what I brought up?
What you brought up, exactly.
I mean, honestly, this is obviously going to probably be split, but I even think that would be low for me. I think that in order to truly clean the city up, it's going to cost more than that.
Zach, do you know how much SELF got from the county? Because SELF supports for low-income families, they do just that kind of work. They
Right.
provide services and funding for people to repair their homes and their roofs and all of those sort of things. So if we could partner with an agency like SELF and utilize the resources that they already have and help them to do more work in Middletown, that would be my best suggestion to leverage that funding.
just two thoughts on that. I think we can use CDBG for that, for some of
Some,
that.
yes.
And then
Yes, some,
seeing
correct.
And I guess I would just be curious, because I know the city did this many years ago, before any of us were up here, where they would give money out and kind of help folks fix up their houses. And I guess I would be curious, what did spending that money inform the city for today? Because I've always been told that we would spend the money, the house would get updated for 5 or 10 years, and then because the person didn't have the finances or the physical ability to maintain the house, we're back in the same situation a few years later, and it's just continuing to spend these dollars doing the same thing. And so I would just be curious what the experience was 10, 15 years ago, if they felt like it was good use of money, or why the city discontinued that.
Okay, and then actually, I think what the best thing to do here is, I'll go back with my staff, recap all this, and then at the next council meeting in city manager's report, kind of bring all this back together and say, okay, how about, what does this look like? And then let me ask you on two things. What are capital projects? Our proposal was 2.6 million. That is actually, can be brought out of the ARPA funds without a doubt. That's something probably is pretty important.
Don't we, I don't know, we have an enterprise fund for that, and I feel like we should stop charging our citizens at the airport out of the ARPA, $250,000 every year. That would be a great start. And I have a hard time when there's an enterprise fund for it. Are we misusing the enterprise fund in some way that we're out money? We shouldn't be, like, an enterprise fund shouldn't need our help with ARPA, in my mind.
Well, our water funds, the water funds are not doing all that well. The sewer funds are better, but the water funds are kind of going to be a challenge here in the next few years. I guess to put it.
I'd just like to understand more than, one paragraph. I mean, I feel like that's a pretty involved topic.
Yeah.
I feel like
It's the first I've heard.
I need more.
Yep. Scott, can you?
I think,
So we're going to be doing a lot more than this project over the next several years. But I think what we're getting at is a way to minimize future rate increases to the users of Middletown if you could use these funds. I'm not advocating, I'm not saying we need to do this out of ARPA funds, but it was just an option. Obviously, water and sewer infrastructure improvements are eligible for ARPA funds. We were asked to come up with a project that, we may do if we were given the ARPA funds. But it's not we certainly have the enterprise fund. We have the capacity to borrow money in addition to utilizing the enterprise funds. We as a utility actually have very little debt compared to other similar sized utilities, which we're going to be borrowing money regardless of whether we use ARPA funds or not for water and sewer infrastructure projects going forward. Significant amount of money. So,
what do you mean borrowing?
So what's the cost of the Lisa Lane, Dix Road?
I think that is the 2.6 million.
Right.
That's the total.
Okay, so that's not, so this is actually not funding putting money there for.
So it doesn't, well, I guess it would indirectly impact rates because we wouldn't have to hit the enterprise fund for the.
Right. So I think.
So this is water capital project, not projects.
Well, I think they were looking at sort of two. I mean, I know they're contiguous, but two separate roads. One was Lisa Lane, one was Dix, if I recall on the.
Lisa and Dix intersect.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, so that's one, it's
So-
2 projects? Okay.
2
I
streets.
guess you can call it one project.
2 streets, 1 project.
But we have a lot more need than this in water and sewer, to the tune of tens of millions of dollars over the next 10 to.
And all of that
Eternity.
is a result of just aging infrastructure,
I mean,
and
just
lack
like
of
everyone else is-
reinvestment,
right.
and
Everyone else
all
is
the
facing
things.
I'll say if you look at ARPA
Disinvestment.
fund usage from pretty much every city, they do put some section of water capital projects, it seems like.
Well, because that was one of the main, not to,
I'm not saying we-
It was one of the
but
intended uses.
obviously we're in a position where fortunately, we can come up with other ways to fund that.
I'm not
I guess
saying
I'm
want to
confused. When we put this matrix together from the beginning, there was no ask from Public Works on water and sewer projects. $0.
I wasn't,
Wasn't off.
instructed
Wasn't
to
that
give
long
an
ago.
ask.
Wasn't made.
There was no desire to put ARPA funding towards water and sewer projects from the previous administration.
I'd be curious what the rate impact of the 2.6 is.
So we're in fact, and you may recall, you approved we have a
Rate study.
a rate study underway. We'll have that completed. I think it'll be more likely the first of next year. So we'll be able to truly show. Now, you know, I don't think we're anticipating huge rate increases. And I guess remind everybody, we haven't increased water rates for 5 years now. I think 2017 was the last time we increased water rates. Now, we have increased sewer rates significantly because of the long-term control plan, but even those we sort of dialed those back. We were very aggressive increasing those out of the gate, and now I think that's why we're healthy in the sewer fund now and going forward. So I'm not envisioning huge rate increases based on what we know today. Obviously, if regulations change and other things come down the line, but so.
Paul, this is more of a question for you. So I know the county, for the paperboard factory demolition, I think the county was asking us to cover 400,000 of it. Is that correct?
No,
Am I wrong about
they're
that?
giving us $300,000 for the demolition of it.
I thought the quote was 3.4 and they were going to cover 3, or am I incorrect?
Yeah,
about that?
that, once again, that 3.4 was, a lot of contingency was built in that. We had another outfit give us can you give us a true estimate on what you think this would cost at today's cost?
Okay.
And they said it would be significantly lower. Their feeling is it would be significantly lower
Great.
than $300,000.
So we're not going to most likely have to cover any of that.
No.
Okay.
We're going to school on that this afternoon, actually, with the county on how we actually spend those funds.
Sounds good.
When do we anticipate that might actually start happening?
As soon as they release, we get a guarantee that they're going to be releasing the funds, and we're going to have those funds available. We're going to be putting it out to the RFQ, correct, or RFP, correct? Yes. So, any idea if we had to say a time? I hopefully late spring of 2023, maybe. But we're going to try to do it as fast as we can. It's an eyesore, and we want to get rid of it. We do understand that.
Yeah, as winter approaches, we've just got to be super aware of all of those hotbeds for trespassers and people looking for some place to build a fire. Another one.
We don't like fire.
I know some of these things we have to do. I mean, we don't have a choice, but have we had or considered having a public hearing so the community could voice what they think?
On the use of the ARPA fund?
Yes.
We have not. We can.
I was just curious. I know Hamilton did one, and they made it clear, look, we appreciate the suggestions, but there's some things we have to use the money on.
Right.
I don't know, maybe you can do it online, or I don't know.
Okay.
Kind of curious to hear.
I was just
everybody's
thinking even like a step back, and I understand why you brought these projects here because they're big dollar items, and to Councilmember Farrell's point, we've got our general fund reserve. So one thing we haven't talked about is with ARPA, there are restrictions on timeline and usage on timeline.
Right.
And so it really, the more I really think about it, it's so critical we have this as one big conversation. We say, hey, here's how much money we have between general fund, reserve, and ARPA. We would like to do this with it, and staff figure out what makes sense in which bucket, because
I agree.
some of them are going to take longer than expending the money by 2026 possibly, in which case we really shouldn't be looking at ARPA. So
The ARPA funds have to be encumbered by December 31st of 2024.
right, and then spent by the end of 26, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, this conversation actually has helped staff out a lot. Our intent wasn't to say, hey, we got to spend the $14 million on this. We want to make you aware of what's, out there that we have to address either with ARPA or with general fund surplus or other alternatives. So this actually helps me and my staff tremendously. It gives us an idea of, I came in and seen this from the last administration, what that resolution said we were spending the money on, so it gives me an idea of what's important to council, and we can certainly address this. Let me ask one last part of this is the Butler Tech Aviation School. As I stated, they received $7 million from the county ARPA funds. The cost is somewhere between 11 and $12 million. Butler Tech knows they're going to have to give some assistance there, and they're wondering what type of assistance the city is willing to support. They obviously say they cannot do the full additional $4 to $5 million.
I'd love to see a private organization partner, like a big aviation company, say they'd like to sponsor a wing. That's another.
And we talked about that at the last meeting. There was a representative of an organization there who could help both the city and Butler Tech on
Yeah,
that.
just
So,
a thought.
and I guess I'm not asking for a number right now, but it's something we're gonna,
I think we need to do what we can to figure out a way. I mean, obviously, we're not going to fund
4 or 5 million of it, maybe even.
But I know potentially there's some state money out there, and I
Right.
think we need to know, I feel like I need an ask. What is your gap? What are you putting in? It's kind of a
Okay.
vague ask, but I'm very interested in finding the way to make it work.
Okay.
I'd also like to see where did you say 11, 12 million? Is that right, the total?
Yeah,
What-
between 11 and 12
I
million
think
is what
so far
John-
it's been pretty speculative building, and so are we getting now more specific about what it's going to be? And if so, I think that would help direct us as to how and what and.
What type of impact is it actually going to?
Yes.
I'd like to know how many Middletown kids are involved in that program
Okay,
before we commit big dollars to it. If there's 10, I mean, I think it needs to be done. I mean, I think it's important.
I think part of that program is they have a backlog on entry requests, and they're not able to fulfill all of it, so they have more people applying that can't get in.
okay.
And then
So
they
they're
want
trying to expand it.
Maybe as part of a future city manager report, I can have John Graff come in and give us an update on where they're at.
Bigger than that, because they're trying to supply the workforce for the future.
Right.
Which is,
Yes.
Magellan,
It is
it's-
bigger,
But why are we
I
supplying
think
a
if we have,
workforce for other cities?
but I don't think we should be kicking in $4 or $5 million. if
No.
we
Yeah, that's-
hardly have any Middletown kids.
No.
involved in it.
No.
Well, and they're not going to. A part of what my thing has always been, we want to build the city that people want to come to and they want to stay at. Are those jobs going to create jobs in Middletown?
Well, I think that's where the next step, and I've been working with John on this one, John Graft, quite a bit, and trying to
Yeah.
promote it and get buy-in. I think it seems like one of the next steps is to find the employers who will want to use the kids graduating from that, which also comes back into if we can get them to have some
Yeah.
financial buy-in in the building, it would help.
Yeah. And the actual putting that out here at our airport is going to employ
Oh yeah, I'm not saying
a decent number of people, and
I'm not
10 to 15, but
Yeah.
Well, I agree with Tal. We need to find out what they want
Okay.
from us instead of just,
well,
what do you need? I mean, from us. And I think that makes a big difference.
okay, we'll go down that path. Okay, so with that said, what I will do is I'll sit down with staff, we'll come up with some things we got from you and come with another list at the next council meeting and see if we can't further refine it. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, Paul, one more thing I'm not sure if we touched on before we wrap up. There was a line item for small business development grants.
Yes.
And I know that sort of was something that fell off because of changes in administrative roles and things like that, but, and we wanted to rework the program and that sort of thing, but I know Councilman Muterspaw brought up the SORG and some of their financial needs, so I don't want us to leave that out of the conversation when we're talking
Correct.
about
Yes.
community needs, in terms of financing some of those.
Yeah, we have on here economic development grants, 210,000, and actually what I gained from you guys still want to go down that path. That's kind of what I got, maybe not as 210,000, but
Yeah, I mean,
still have it out there.
I like it just because those events bring people to Middletown and they spend their dollars here. I think it's important to help those events and those places like the Sorg and,
I think it's the community-driven events, but also, I mean, in specific terms of the Sorg, it is it's a historic landmark in our
Yeah.
city, and that commercial building in the front is something that we've talked to them time and time again about finding a developer for, or finding some better use for, but I think that while they look like they are really thriving and they've got packed out shows, if you look up, the plaster's falling off of the ceiling still and things like that. So if we could help them get to a point where they're their heads above water, that maybe that's, I don't know. I just think that the Sorg is maybe a separate and different, bigger ask
Okay.
that we should talk about or consider just before we wrap up.
yeah, I agree.
And Paul, thanks for coming to us and asking us our opinion on this versus just stating, this is what we're doing, sign off.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, the public should know, and I think this is great. You're having
Right.
a meeting to let the public and the world know that what we want to spend on or what we're trying to do, and I think that's awesome.
Okay. That's what we'll continue to do.
And if any citizens have specific feedback that they want to share with Paul or the rest of council, I look forward to hearing from people based on our conversation and what they think and what they would like to see. If it
Yes.
was something that we didn't mention or something we mentioned that they would like to expand on, I look forward to hearing that.
Okay. That's all I have.
Anything else? All right, well, with that, we will adjourn until, what is it, the first meeting in September? Oh, my goodness. September 6th, 5:30 PM here in less moldy council chambers. Until then, blue skies.